One of the things that I have come up a lot in conversations that I've had about this podcast is that the episodes are really good. I get a lot out of them. But then people will ask me, but how do I work on myself? Like how? Like how do I focus on me? Like there's so much going on. It feels really meaty and useful, but how do I do it? What is the thing that I need to do so that I can actually work on myself? Because there's a point where folks realize that they are listening to the podcast and they're getting information, but they're not sure that they are changing. So we're going to talk about that. My name is Amber Cabral, and welcome back to the Humaning Well podcast. And in this episode, we're going to talk about how you work on Humaning Well. And I have to start first by saying that working on yourself is not a tactic. I can admit that it kind of starts out that way. Like it feels like a tactic initially where you're trying things to hopefully like shift your mindset or your habits or, maybe change the way you're experiencing your life. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're on that journey, there comes a point where you realize that instead of your well-being and wholeness being a tactic, it's really a decision that you have to come to. So the first level of awareness to get to the how to work on yourself is to come to the realization that you are your primary long-term investment. So basically when people are like, how do I really work on myself? I remind them that most people never actually start working on themselves. They're just doing tactics. But there are a few things that have to happen internally before you can really start. And the first one is that humaning better is a long-term, lifelong thing, and you have to accept that. It is going to take time, and there's no real end result. There's definitely goalposts and milestones along the way, but making the decision to human better, to be a better human, to be the best version of you is an ongoing way of living your life. You can also hop off of that ride at any point. You can decide, I'm not doing that anymore. There's a lot of value, though, for doing it, if that makes sense. The second thing that needs to happen internally is that there has to be a willingness to work on yourself. So first you have to realize that this is a lifelong effort. It is going to be an ongoing thing. And then you kind of also have to get to this place where you're like, I am willing to do that. I am willing to admit that I need to work on myself. And I believe that I am worth my own labor. Because here's the other thing. Most people believe that they deserve love, they deserve success, they deserve peace, they deserve income or whatever. But a lot of people don't deserve that their own effort should belong to them. They don't think they deserve the level of effort that they give to other people, which we talked about a little bit in the last podcast episode. We give other people our best effort, our most high quality version. But then when it comes to ourselves, we kind of run out of steam. When you want to do the how do I work on myself, you also have to be willing to say, I deserve my own effort. You have to be steeped in the knowledge that working on yourself is going to make everything around you better and that you deserve that. Now, unfortunately, we live in the kind of society that leads us to believe that the way that we improve is by doing and achieving, and all of these things, are happening outside of ourselves. And then what happens, at least, this was my experience, I feel like I got to this place that I envisioned in my mind, and I had all of this evidence about how great I was, but I was internally unsatisfied, felt like something was missing. And it's because I was at the place that I should have been to have the life that I thought I wanted, but I didn't really know me. Okay. This idea that achieving is the same as self-worth is also how we buy into the idea of you got to work twice as hard to get half as much. It's sure, you might work twice as hard and you might even get half as much, but you will now be trapped working at a level that doesn't compensate you fairly for what you actually deserve. You also haven't done the work to figure out your own value, so you may not even know that. And because you think that your value is in what you do outside of yourself, you're kind of stuck, right? Shifting to, I need to work on me and I deserve my best labor and effort is gotta happen. Like that's a thing that for you to actually be able to do the how do I human better, you gotta get that shift in, and that's tough. And then there's a third thing. The third internal thing that needs to shift is you have to be open to the idea that you don't know yourself as well as you think you do. Now, you can make the mistake of believing that you know yourself because you exist in your own being and you experience you likely more than anybody else does. So you can feel like you have a really good working knowledge of who you are, and you could know yourself better than anyone else knows you, but that doesn't mean that you know yourself well. Okay, so most people don't really know themselves. And if you haven't actually taken a step back to examine yourself and critically consider who you are outside of who you have been told to be, which we've talked about in the past episode, you're not really self-possessed, but you are instead the output of a collection of perspectives that you may not have actually even really critically considered. Okay? This is like that embodiment stuff that like I feel like people are trying to talk about now, that I think it's great that it's starting to bubble up to the surface, but it's really hard. It requires a lot of like deep self-reflection and assessment of like, do I know me? And what let me know that I needed to get better connected to myself was when, a few things. I couldn't tell the difference between when I was really anxious or if I was excited. Like I would have this gut feeling, but I wasn't sure exactly what it was. Am I nervous or what? Like, what is that? I didn't necessarily know that I was under stress until I was ready to explode. Like I was at the maximum. I didn't realize that I was people pleasing in some ways until I would find myself really exhausted for like basically being overwhelmed and unappreciated. All for things I said yes to, that I agreed to do, or even in some cases volunteered to do. I struggled with knowing for sure when I was actually relaxing or whether I was just doing a thing that was supposed to make me feel relaxed. Like I would catch myself in the tub like, am I relaxed? Or am I just like doing the thing that they say you should do to be relaxing? And those are not the same. And that's another episode we'll talk about too. But, it just leads me to some specific questions. Do you know yourself? And that looks like, do you know what a yes or no feels like in your body? Can you recognize that? When you do recognize it, do you honor it? Do you know what stress feels like in your body before you're like explosive? Do you know when you're people pleasing before you say yes to something? Do you know the difference between anxiety and excitement? Do you know when you're exhausted versus resentful or overwhelmed? Okay. Before you can actively start working on yourself, you have to acknowledge that you need to learn yourself. And a lot of us don't know. I didn't know myself as well as I needed to. And so that's three things. First, realize that working on you is an ongoing project. There is no finish, just versions that you grow past on the journey, milestones, markers, if you will. Second, an admission and submission to doing the actual work and knowing that it will take time. These first two to me go together. They're a lot like working out, and I'm on a workout journey, so I see the parallels really easily, but like you're going to do a lot of work before you actually start to even see any results. Like I'm in the gym 3 days a week. I'm doing all this cardio every day. I don't see any changes, but like I feel better. And then every once in a while I'm like, oh, I lost some weight, but like I am still on the journey and I'm going to hit milestones as I am on that journey. And also I have had to make a commitment to the work. And then there's the third thing, which is you can and are willing to admit that though you exist in your own body, there is still a lot of opportunity for you to get to know yourself better. Once you get those three things down, then you can start moving toward actually doing the work, right? And here's the thing, the work that you need to do will almost like jump out at you. And you will start the same way you do with anything else that you want to learn. You'll figure out, oh my gosh, I'd like to do this thing, and you'll build a plan and get better at it. You may even go back through some old Humaning Well episodes and find some tactics there. But like what you want to work on will become like suddenly very obvious. So when I hear, how do I do this? How do I work on myself? I know that probably what's happening is that the pre-work that we just talked about, those three things, those are in the way because we also live in a society where there's just so much information. And so it's easy to hear things and have a good working knowledge of like how to speak about a topic and, how to feel about it. But like, it can lead you to believe that you actually are doing something about that topic, that you're actually living it. Like, I'm sure all of us know people who are always talking about someone who's a narcissist and they don't even realize that it's like you are the one showcasing narcissistic behavior, right? Because they have all this, like intellectual knowledge, but it hasn't been actioned on. The mirror hasn't been held up. There is no actually living it. Okay. And so it just exists in your brain. It hasn't come through and come to life in your life. You can't embody it. You can just speak about it. It's like telling everybody, like, this is how you drive, but then that's totally different than when they actually get behind the wheel and have experience doing it. Everybody can speak therapy language. Everyone can define boundaries. Everyone can quote psychology. Few people actually live it. It's like once that pre-work is solid, you can kind of get to the point where it's like, okay, what I really want to work on is being a better communicator, or what I really want to work on is making sure that I am exercising patience with people I care about. One of the things that I have actively been working on since I have been in this place is getting rid of stress and anxiety from my life. It was actually my focus for 2025. I actively worked on it. It jumped out at me as the thing that was like, yo, this is the thing that's in the way, right? And I don't mean get rid of stress and anxiety in a topical way. There's always going to be stressors. Like, there's nothing you can do about that. There's always going to be something that is going to cause some anxiety. But I was literally living with like ongoing chronic stress and anxiety. I mean, clenching my teeth, my posture, I was folding in on myself, like the way I would hold my body. It was really, really tough. And it took me building the skill and making the commitment to take a hard and critical look at myself and being able to say, yo, this can't continue, and then making a plan to work on it. I want to say that this is hard. For me, getting closer to myself sent me through a period of isolation. Part of it was shedding connections that just didn't work for who I am anymore. But also, I do think that when you look at yourself critically, you have to admit that like you've tolerated some things you shouldn't have. You've misjudged your value. You've overworked in some ways. You've misinterpreted yourself. You've abandoned yourself. You kind of need some time to grieve some of that. What you uncover. And grief sometimes is a lonely process. I mean, I certainly needed some time to process that. And so that's an entirely separate episode altogether. But I want it to be really clear that this is difficult, and working on yourself isn't going to necessarily be glamorous, but I do think it is rewarding. But at first, before you get to the rewarding, it's kind of quiet and repetitive and a little frustrating as you are learning all of the ways that you've essentially been disregarding yourself. I think deciding to think about this and process it has been one of the most stabilizing decisions I've ever made in my life. So if you're asking, how do I work on me? Start by looking inward. Decide that you're worth your own labor. Accept that it will take time. Admit that you don't know yourself as well as you thought you did. And then as those things crystallize, it'll jump out at you and be like, boom, I need to practice being a better friend or work on my communication or my boundaries or whatever. How to human better is not like with this long list of goals or trying to execute this huge personality overhaul. It is paying attention and noticing, what your body's telling you and knowing it when you get it, when those pings happen. Then the tactics, will feel less flimsy and random, and the things that you decide to work on are more likely to stick. Yeah. So you are the only constant in your life. And if you are going to invest deeply anywhere, invest deeply with you, because when you elevate, everything around you that's attached to you elevates as well. And once you make that decision, the how becomes a lot clearer. How to work on you gets a lot clearer. But you got to get through that like pre-work first. All right. So that's the episode. Thanks for tuning in. If these episodes are helpful, please, please, please share. Listen, I do a lot of sharing of this podcast. I post it on LinkedIn. I make sure that it's on Instagram. It goes on TikTok. Folks get emails. Please share this podcast if you want it to survive, because I cannot tell you how often I am like, nobody's listening to this. And so I want to give up, but I'm not. I do think this is a healthy and, a beneficial part of my journey, but I do need this podcast needs a little more love if it's going to stay a part of my life. So if you love this, if you love the episode, please, please, please pass it along. Go out, rate, review. All those things help as well. And I will see you next week.